Hey AgEcon, welcome back to our lectures online. The last few I know have been really tough and really challenging and kind of long. This one's going to be a short one, I promise. So we're going to talk about fiscal policy or fiscal fitness. To get started, we're going to become Webster as we look at what fiscal policy is all about. Then we're going to talk about expansionary versus contractionary policy. And then finally, we're going to look at the challenges associated with implementing fiscal policy. So let's hang on tight for the ride. It's going to be a great one today. So our learning targets, I can describe the effects of expansionary and contractionary fiscal policies. I can analyze current agricultural topics related to the effectiveness of fiscal policy. I can describe the role of the multiplier in my own words. I can explain the role of supply-side fiscal policy in an economy. And lastly, I can evaluate the challenges associated with implementing fiscal policy. Okay, so to get started, you probably are wondering, what is fiscal policy? Fiscal policy is essentially changes in federal government spending or tax revenues that are designed to promote full employment, price stability, and reasonable rates of economic growth. However, fiscal policy is very, very controversial, and if this was an in-person class, not online, we would be spending some time having a debate on how to implement fiscal policy, because it's a very contentious and really debatable topic. Economists don't always agree on how to implement fiscal policy. It's very difficult to predict how people are going to respond to implementing a fiscal policy, and economists don't know the size of the multiplier effects, which we'll talk about a little bit later, or how long it will take for the policy to actually start working. Okay, so there are two key types of fiscal policies. There's expansionary and contractionary. Expansionary fiscal policy is an increase in government spending and or a decrease in taxes designed to increase the aggregate demand. Okay, the goal is to fight recessionary problems of decreasing GDP and increasing unemployment. An example of this would be cutting or decreasing taxes, increasing government spending on goods or services, and increasing transfer payments. Okay. And a contractionary fiscal policy, on the flip side, is a decrease in government spending and or an increase in taxes designed to decrease the aggregate demand in the economy. So the goal is to control or stabilize any inflation that's occurring. And an example would be raising taxes, decreasing government spending, and decreasing the amount or value of transfer payments. Okay, so this gives you a nice setup of the difference between expansionary and contractionary policy. They're essentially the exact opposite. As we see, expansionary, we're increasing government spending or decreasing taxes, and contractionary fiscal policy, we're decreasing government spending or increasing taxes. Both of them have polar opposite effects. Okay, so let's do a little bit of a activity simulation here, if you will, critical thinking exercise to get the mind rolling on how this all applies to us. So some background. Past every 5 years or so, the Farm Bill provides for a variety of legislations, including trade and revenue supports, research, farm credit, etc., relevant to ag, food, and natural resources. Your scenario is, suppose that as the government proposes changes for a future Farm Bill, that they include a provision or statement for farmers to receive a government payment for hiring veterans, so U.S. veterans. How does hiring one person to work on a farm result in several people having more income to spend? Okay, I want you to hit pause and think about that, and we're going to introduce this concept, and it'll all make sense, okay? This is essentially thanks to what's known as the multiplier. The multiplier tells us that increased spending by consumers, businesses, or government becomes income for somebody else. Okay, when this person spends the income, it becomes income for somebody else, and so on, leading to increased production in an economy. Multiplier effects can also work in reverse when spending decreases. So going back to this Farm Bill example, if we are hiring a veteran who otherwise would not be able to find work, and we have a provision that farmers need to hire veterans, or the farmers receive government payment for hiring veterans, the farmers are going to get money from the government for hiring a veteran, and the veteran, him or herself, is going to be receiving money for working on the farm. So we are putting more money in more people's pockets, because that veteran is then going to be able to go out and purchase food, or maybe get a bigger house or a better car, and so on and so forth, because they have more money, because they have a stable job. Whereas the farmer is also going to have more money because they're receiving money from the government to pay that farmer, or potentially maybe even pay for additional equipment or upgrades on their farm, or maybe purchase more land. Okay, so farmers are receiving more money, veterans are receiving more money, and in turn, both the farmer and the veteran are going to be investing that money because they have that extra money in their pockets to help other industries out as well. Okay, so the multiplier effect has a major impact when we're talking about fiscal policy, and we'll review that here at the end of the slides. But to introduce this next concept, supply-side fiscal policy is the idea that fiscal policy may directly affect aggregate supply and not only aggregate demand. Okay, an example of supply-side fiscal policy would be a tax cut. And in this tax cut, we would be giving businesses incentives to expand or invest in capital goods since they have more after-tax income to spend as they choose. Okay, so there are a lot of challenges, however, that are posed with fiscal policy. The first is multiplier. It's hard to know how much change is needed, so we'll giving farmers incentives to produce or to hire one veteran or versus two veterans, which is going to be needed to figure out the amount of change that is most desired. Number two, it's too large of a change could cause even more issues to the economy, and too small of a change would not solve anything. It would just be more income, resources, etc., that are not being invested productively. So it's very challenging to know and utilize the multiplier in a way that's going to be effective, and that's what economists are struggling to do right now. Second is speed of implementation. So we have multiplier and speed of implementation. Time lags occur when we're enacting or putting forward fiscal policy. You can't just snap our fingers, just like with supply and demand, just like with that concept. You can't snap your fingers in one night and expect everything to be peaches and roses the next day. It takes a long time for things to actually work out and become successful. And economists cannot predict how long these lags will be, and therefore they cannot predict how long it will take for fiscal policy to actually boost or rejuvenate the economy. The third is international events. So obviously the U.S. is a part of a much larger economy, and that's the global economy, and it's in fact affected by uncontrollable world events. So right now, April 2020, the coronavirus, that's a big world event that's really impacting our economy right now as a country and as a world. And this is also complicated by trade, and we'll talk about trade in the next couple of presentations, but trade is a very intricate topic as well, and obviously if we have different negotiations or agreements with different countries to trade different goods, international events can really play an impact on what we can and cannot trade. All right, and the fourth challenge is national debt and interest rates. Expansionary fiscal policy means tax revenues fall or government spendings rise, and this likely increases our national deficits. And this overall may lead to increased interest rates and meaning less borrowing and investment in capital as a result. So there's a lot of key challenges that are associated with fiscal policy, as you can see, but economists are working day in and day out to enact fiscal policies that help the economy get where it needs to be, whether we are in a recession or we're in an inflationary period. It helps us kind of meet in the middle at that equilibrium point, as we have discussed in the previous presentation. So after this presentation, hopefully you're able to describe the effects of expansionary and contractionary policies, analyze current agricultural topics like the Farm Bill related to the effectiveness of fiscal policy. Hopefully you also know how the role that multiplier plays in that agricultural issue with the Farm Bill. Fourth, hopefully you're able to explain the role of supply-side fiscal policy in an economy. And lastly, hopefully you're able to evaluate the challenges associated with implementing fiscal policy. So if you would like, you may, of course, go back and rewatch any portion of this video or come back to it at a later date. I flew through pretty darn quick, but if you have questions, never hesitate to contact and reach out to us, and we'll be glad to help you. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.